What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. With enough playtime on the mid-season balance patch, I'm comfortable giving an updated tier list that's going to modify based on what I think are some pretty intense builder buffs. Remember that our tier lists are advice for not the top 1%, not the bottom 1%, but for an average skill tier player climbing up the ranks. What heroes do I think will be worth committing to spot out gaps in the metagame for you to exploit? I think there's certainly some surprises in this one, but we'll get into all that after this quick message. Today's video sponsor is HelloFresh. I love HelloFresh because they deliver quality ingredients pre-portioned with easy to follow recipes straight to your door. Planning out what to cook is annoying to me, but HelloFresh takes the guesswork out of it by giving you a selection of tasty recipes to choose from. With over 40 recipes and 100 seasonal and convenience items, your taste buds will have plenty to choose from. And with options for every lifestyle. HelloFresh recipes are super easy to follow even if you're not experienced in the kitchen, because with the pre-portioned ingredients, there's no annoying measuring to mess up. You just toss it in and it's going to taste great. And with the pre-portioned ingredients, there's no waste. It's going to be less than grocery shopping and up to 25% less than takeout. Cook your own tasty food at home with HelloFresh. You gotta try HelloFresh, especially with this great deal that they've got going. You can use the link in the description or go to HelloFresh.com and use our promo code POG, Y-O-W, Jewel50 to get 50% off your first order and free shipping. Try it out today and you won't be disappointed, I guarantee you. First up, the damage category, which saw some very interesting changes. We'll see the top of the hierarchy isn't so different than it was at the start of the season. Hanzo is the best long range and somewhat short range burst damage dealer so far. Tracer's the de facto flanker. Cassidy's Magnade Edition has kept him at the top of the DPS tier list, but not necessarily because he will beat anything, but he counters a lot of the game. There's a lot of things in the game that if the enemy dares to pick, Magnade will shut it down, but I no longer think that he's the most effective medium to long range hit scan option. Soldier overall is going to be kind of the God King DPS for the average player. These raw stat buffs are over the top, frankly. We've seen Soldier's damage number at every number you can imagine. It was at 20, it was at 19, it was at 18, getting a bit more explosion damage, and really one of the low-key bigger buffs I feel is the biotic field healing amount, going from 35 to 40. It's only 5 difference, but that adds up over the course of a few seconds, especially when there's so many instances where Soldier gets on chip health and just a little bit of extra HP is the difference between him tanking and holding his position, shooting more, or becoming eliminated. Soldier's great because he's going to interact with a lot of your teammates. And on a nade amplifies his healing, and this is a healing component from a DPS character. I've seen in some instances between the normal healing from the main support characters, then the amp healing from nade, and the biotic field buff, there's some instances where your team can survive ultimates just with those combos alone. That's kind of nuts. And while these damage increases might not jump off the page immediately, remember they didn't compensate to nerf his ult gain rate despite healing and damaging more. And in reality, I think the previous version of Soldier was fine with a Mercy. Now he's insane with a Mercy. Damage amp on Soldier is incredibly oppressive, and it's mainly that combo that puts him into the S tier for me. Otherwise, I might knock him down a tier, but because Mercy exists, snipers got nerfed in the patch prior. I just think Soldier got overbuffed here. And on top of that, he also has good interactions against other characters that got stronger that we'll be seeing play as well. We'll see them more in the next tier of characters, in the A tier. Soldier got a buff, which it was surprising to me considering I already thought she was quite good, though a bit slower to achieve her kill combos, I think, nowadays in comparison to the more direct damage of the S tier characters, but I think with skill you can overcome that. More interesting to me is how high I'm going to put the builder characters, who already were very good at the lower metal ranks. They always were amazing there, regardless of the balance state, because when you can deploy your power and it fights for you, that's a big jump above like needing to aim on another character. So Blizzard's goal was to reduce the power of their turrets to force them to be in the fight more with their weapon. So I think at the bottom metal ranks, you'll expect Torb and Sim to perform worse than you're used to, but for most players, I think they're straight up better. Torbjorn's nerf was the damage on his deployed turret goes down from 14 way down to 11, and the cooldown increase is significant up to 12 seconds. You're going to have to be a lot more careful about where you place it, but that was kind of the case anyway. There's more downtime when it actually is destroyed, but I think really smart tactical turret placement was really hard to deal with anyway. And a bit of downtime doesn't automatically change the character, because he already was a bit defensive in nature, so he can afford to have some downtime. He's a play it slow type character to begin with, so that's not like as important as, say, if Tracer or Genji got a nerf to their cooldowns, which they need immediately in the moment to stay in the fight. The damage on the turret, I don't notice too much. I would imagine a character like Tracer would really appreciate every point of health that she can get while zipping around in the backline, but in general, I feel the strength of the turret wasn't necessarily in its raw stats. Perhaps at the lower skill tiers that was important, but just having a different source of damage. Remember, Torbjorn can fire his primary fire to make the turret auto-lock onto that target, sort of just like Bob does. So any bit of extra damage contribution is still what the turret is to me, and in compensation, his buffs were massive. Overload, giving 6 extra ammo, puts out a much higher volume of damage because you can go from pressuring to refilling either enough ammo to finish the kill, or I suggest pressure a bit, find and prod for weakness. You, for example, might only need 6 shots to do that. So once you start to hit the first shot to injure them, you can pop overload and you have full ammo to run in guns blazing, whereas in previous versions, you actually had to play slower at that part of Torb's game, which is utilizing his maybe like craziest ability, which is overload. That's a much more important brawly Overwatch 2 style ability than the turret is. Then on top of that, the spread reduction on his rivet gun is absolutely insane. I underestimated how good I thought this was. I already thought it was going to be good, but I think this boosts Torbjorn's shotgun damage to just straight up be better than Reaper now. Before, with the wider spread, it was a bit unwieldy. Certain ranges it didn't work, and it made Torb feel a lot more supportive in nature. Now between the overload buff and the shotgun buff, Torb is like scarier than Reaper is against tank characters especially, but flankers as well. His shotgun already was pretty easy mode, but it was pretty fair considering it was hard to land all the pellets. But now there's certainly a lot of hitboxes where you easily can at like medium range. So there's a lot of tank characters, especially like Winston, Doomfist, etc., where you can perfectly land full damage repeatedly, and remember, you've got extra ammo now. Yeah, Torb's a little too nutty for my liking, and he would be higher, but there's just higher tier medium range options that can pressure him down. Hitting headshots on Torb from medium range is probably the best way to deal with him, but especially since I think he's easier than those characters for certain players, he's going to be a direct route to new power, I think, in the metagame. Symmetra's changes were quite wonky, it felt like. So she got Shield Life Leech, where she regenerates up to 30 shield health per second when primary fire deals damage to barriers or enemies with shield health. So in certain matchups, this is a non-ability, a non-factor, doesn't even ever come into play. And in other instances, I think it's just okay. A little bit of extra health here or there. But remember, Sim has extra HP in Overwatch 2, and it's more so that she gets any self-healing at all. That means when this does activate, it's kind of nuts. But I don't think it happens often enough for me to really weigh into that. For Symmetra's turrets, the same thing that I said about Torb's turret applies to them, where their main utility is the slow effect. I don't really rate the recon effect they now gave it for average tier players. It might be highly impactful at higher tiers of play, but I don't think like spreading them out for information is all that useful. I think you still more or less want to put them together to slow trap a target or TP bomb the backline. But again, you don't necessarily need the damage values from these to be high, considering that her primary weapon is now just more effective. And remember, this is on top of other buffs that they put through to the photon projector ranged attack, which has been progressively been getting a bit more user-friendly over time. Now, 5 more damage on impact, 5 more explosion. This helps her farm up ult more than I think the sentry damage would anyway. And importantly, a fully charged orb does 100 damage, which means 2 orbs does 200 damage. And these fly in a straight line. We're reaching like Junkrat levels of sniping people with fat projectiles from range. All of a sudden now, this weapon is very, very effective, seeing as it hits some crucial breakpoints for how many orbs you have to hit. That's pretty nuts. And honestly, these numbers are so good that I think these builder characters, you might even make an argument that at some tiers, they're in the S tier. Because it's really only if you feel the characters above them, or maybe like the flyer characters who maybe are countered by other things, get picked to counter you. Now we'll pick up the pace a little bit with the rest of the tier list, because I think that's like the main core principles of what damage is. If we look at the rest of the tier list, a lot of the other categories of characters of flankers, flyers, anti-tank characters, snipers. There's just better versions of all of those jobs above it. I'll highlight a few key takeaways. Remember, a character like Genji is probably pretty hard to play against the builders, but maybe better against a more sniper style character when you're coordinating with a dive, so I'm kind of split on where to put him. Bastion will always be inversely correlated with Soldier, I feel. He is so good that why would you just pick Bastion? They're on the same parallel. Widow, you have to be a specialist, and I think Ashe is really getting left in the dust, whereas these other projectile heroes are getting more effective at medium range, and other characters in her category are getting better as well. Sombra might be a top tier pro pick, but in the ranked environment, I think you're going to find it quite difficult to actualize the amount of teamwork that's required. A lot of other characters that are good against Sombra are better now. Like Soldier can just take a position with his team, drop a healing pack as he's getting hacked, and hold his ground. Torb can press his overload. And yeah, EMP can break Simwall, whatever. The upfront damage in the brawl is so crucial now, you'll just feel like you're running around in most levels of matchmaking, I suspect. Now we're going to look at the tank category. I still think Ramatra is low-key the Overwatch 2 tank. He has both the forgiving stats to stay alive in the front line, power play options where he can go aggressive and secure his own kills outright. And while he does have some good counters, I think most players are going to struggle to find players that are skilled enough at them to consistently punish him. And now Ram's Ravenous Vortex got even more user-friendly, where it won't pass through enemy heroes if it hits them directly. It'll still be blocked by barriers, but one of the best things you can do as Ram is sort of set up a trap near you to trap something in your fighting range. So oftentimes that means you're kind of throwing it at them or past them a little bit. Now it's not going to bobble on that Winston as you step into his bubble to trap him in to get pummeled to death. I'm putting D.Va quite high this time, not because of her inherent strength, but in her fitness to protect your characters that are the best characters. So for example, if the enemy is counterpicking to dive your Soldier, who I think is insane right now in the patch, D.Va's entire persona is being able to be a bit durable in the front line and peel back for her team. That's what she's best at. And then once in a while going aggressive, but she's not biased towards aggression like some of the other tanks. And tanks that are overly aggressive, I think, are going to get blasted in the face by the higher damage numbers. So whereas D.Va doesn't necessarily have a favorable matchup against a lot of the tanks necessarily at the higher tier, that's not why you're picking her. She'll be map dependent to defend the high ground and keep your carries alive, as I think a lot more of the wins will flow through them as opposed to directly the tank category. Keep in mind, when we make these tier lists, I'm not necessarily ranking them based on their proportionate power across the roster, because when you're in a role, your decisions are within the role. Progressively, tank has gotten worse and worse the better that supports have gotten, and they've been relegated to a bit more of the MOBA principles from Overwatch 1, where it's more about anchoring their position and setting up their team rather than outright carrying themselves, which I think was definitely the case in early Overwatch 2. So that would be why the tanks that can get effective use of their kits playing a bit more defensively and opportunistically with Ramatra and D.Va are so high on my list. Next up is Reinhardt, who got 200 extra shield points on his barrier. Yes, Symmetra can farm it, but in general, this is quite a good change. Not as powerful as armor health, which he had previously. But despite all those changes, I think the playstyle of Reinhardt simply is kind of an easy win button for a lot of players because teams know how to play around him usually, and he has some of the easiest routes to both offensive value while also being highly defensive. So since there's a lot of range damage out there, Ryan having a shield to block it off while your team fights something else can be a great way to hold the line. But remember, damage numbers went up, so his shield number going up doesn't necessarily mean you're going to expect it to last a whole lot longer, especially if they're playing some of the top characters that just got improved. The rest of the A tier, Zarya, Orisa, Junker Queen, and Sigma, I'm going to say are matchup depending. The top three are going to work for most of the game, and I would look to pick these other four when you're counter picking. Zarya is great against Queen. Orisa is great against crowd control. In most cases, I think Ramatra is better than Sigma, but he does have a stun and more defenses up against the higher spam damage that might be taking you out as Ram. The B tier tanks, I'm going to say these are relegated to specialists and great matchups or maps. Roadhog low key is pretty good on some of the maps like Ilios Well or Nepal Sanctum. The support lineup has widened enough that that it depends about the players in your lobby whether he'll be countered or enabled based on the supports the enemy or you have. Ball and Winston are a little bit scary, I feel. Gonna need teamwork, gonna need proper staging and setup across the map, which is a skill set a lot of players have not mastered yet. And with a lot of punishing damage that can roll your face before you get set up, I think just the slower, more plug and play in the frontline tanks that we expressed in the top 3 right now are a lot easier to play. Wrecking Ball is better than Winston though, I think, overall, because if you're going to dive right now, you're going to need to go in faster, whereas Winston's a little bit more of a teamwork, focus fire, channel the front line. Wrecking Ball's a bit more extreme in his playstyle, and he did get a buff where his reload outside of ball form is faster. This is actually a bit of an interesting interaction because it's something that gives him something better to do when he gets hacked, which is kind of funny to think. If he's hacked or hindered and can't use his movement abilities, it used to be a death sentence needing to come up on a reload, and well, now it still is, but with it being shorter, you might be able to respond with more damage in time and eliminate the thing that otherwise might eliminate you. Doomfist is a good luck. If you are good and the enemy doesn't know the counters, you can play him, then he can go up to S tier potentially and just win you the whole game. But overall, if the enemy knows how to play any of these easy shotgun heroes, which overload too much damage into Doomfist as he is trying to pillage your backline, or Cassidy's hinder effect onto his power block, good luck escaping after that one, buddy. That's a tank category. Now let's look at the supports. Gonna put Kiri and Mercy back on top in the number 1 category. In the S tier again, not necessarily both played together always, but sort of either or. I think there's a lot of comps and playstyles in the game that necessitate Kiriko to exist, and your team comp just kind of flails and doesn't work properly if you're teaming up with certain characters that like abandon the backline and expect you to fend for yourself. You kind of just have to play Kiriko, who can either hold their position in the backline or just teleport in with you if you want to play aggressive. Her healing stats got increased ever so slightly, but that's not why she's up here. It is those kunai headshots, being able to defend yourself and flexibly move through the battlefield, that keeps her on top. While she can get poked down at medium range by a lot of the medium range characters, she also can fire back effectively, which not every support character can say. Mercy, I feel like we've already really explained why she's up here so high, but the synergy with Soldier is going to take you a very long way, but also synergy up against a lot of his counters. Mercy's underrated for her ability to reposition with a dive. Keep in mind, these are 2 characters that can flexibly play either end of the battlefield and get value by holding their position when they do so. Now remember, our top tanks are Ramatra, Diva, and Reinhardt. These aren't necessarily the picks for them. It's mostly for the DPS battle, which I think matters more. But if you want to enable your tank, you're going to look to the A tier category. I'm putting Lucio up in the A tier, and it's been a long time since I thought Lucio was going to be a very good pick. But the reason is because medium range damage is so good, if you do not reposition quickly, you will just get poked down and lose. So it's not that I necessarily think Lucio comps are going to be dominant. It's that these medium range poke comps are so good that if you do not have speed and you're trying to play characters that need to get in, it's really punishing. So as a linchpin for a lot of the comps that you might have to be playing based on what your teammates pick, I put Lucio quite high. Also some cute interactions, like you can boop Soldier out of his field. There's some deployment style ultimates where speed boost can be great to disengage when they get used on you, and sound barrier might buffer your team from nano sights. I think the surprising pick in the A tier right here is Lifeweaver. Yeah, that's it. I'm fine. I'm saying he's in A tier. That's because if you are on defense and you're playing like a pokey defensive comp, Lifeweaver's best interaction is repositioning against dive. Still terrible on attack, because nothing he does gains ground or necessarily helps in an elimination. But he does the best in class hold his ground and retreat. The healing values are really getting kind of insane, and if the enemy doesn't hit enough skill shots or have enough focus fire, Lifeweaver can keep them alive through a lot. And considering how many high tier characters just need to survive to get their ultimate for an auto fight win, I think Lifeweaver's pretty decent right now for the average tier of player. He gets weak when you reach a tier when the enemy knows how to like dive with Wrecking Ball and Tracer Sombra. If you're against a Lifeweaver, he's kind of got to be the target if you're playing dive at all, or he won't kill anything, because it'll either get healed or repositioned away from your mobility cooldowns. That's what he's designed to do. Zen did get nerfed in this patch, and the Orb of Destruction got a maximum range range reduction from 40 to 30 meters, and the time to wear off the target when it's not in line of sight was reduced from 2 to 1.5 seconds. So this affects two things largely, I think. Putting it on DPS at medium range, and also any divers or flankers. So this drops Zen kind of significantly in my book, because those are two battles that he kind of struggles to contribute to properly now. Ranged characters usually play on cover anyway, so either it's harder to cast it on them to begin with, or they have less downtime hiding around cover to get it off of them, requiring you to cast it again. Otherwise, characters like Wrecking Ball or Tracer who want to be diving onto Zen have a much easier time getting around cover, losing the Discord effect before they engage again. This is a really big deal, honestly, because any tick of damage they take with a 30% damage amp applied from either Zen or his team as they're navigating and flanking to cover can be life-changing. What Zen will still do is melt frontliner tanks, and any tank really, but now I think there's just this huge gap in his game where you won't feel like you're able to commit to that as often. Bap and Ana, great healing values, great synergies with some of the top picks in the game right now, whether it be ulting to improve the performance of Reinhardt, Soldier, etc. Just try to keep in mind that they are fragile there in the backline and need a team that kind of plays around their line of sight. Otherwise, go to other picks. And Moira in the B tier, I'm always struggling where to put Moira because she's just so easy. Ultimately, I think Kiriko's gonna have to be kind of bad before I ever say Moira is good, because the AoE healing often isn't even really required in Overwatch 2. So they sort of just have the same playstyle, but Kiri has a higher skill expression and just more severe abilities overall. Higher peak damage, an actual interaction ability, which can protect your team against counters in Suzu. Her ultimate's more lethal for the team. Her mobility is even more intense. So pick Moira just for the easy to execute character, not much else. I think you'll get more value playing Mercy if you're looking for an easier to play option. Guys, that's everything for today's tier list video. I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, please be sure to leave the video with a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.